Hi, today is August the 14th, 2010, and I am Darlene Stevenson Hamblin, and I want to tell my life history. I was born 24th of April, 1935 in Duchesne, Utah, in a little cottage at the north side of Main Street in the middle of town. And my mother is Maggie Davies Stevenson, and my father is Wilford David Stevenson. And besides me and my mom, there were my dad, Janet Burton, a friend, and the midwife, Victoria Halstead. My mom told me that when they were married, it was in 29th of April 1932 in the Salt Lake Temple, and then they lived in Mountain Home and with Grandma Stevenson, and that winter they herded cows in Ioka. That's a town east of Talmadge. And she said they slept on straw in a shed and about froze their butts off. Then they lived in Mountain Home with Grandma Stevenson, and that was the year that Grandpa Dan Stevenson died. My dad was put in the bishopric in Mountain Home, and Mom was pregnant with their first child. She started having labor pains, and so they took her to what she said, Mama and Papa Davies' house in Talmadge. And then they took her to the LDS hospital in Salt Lake. And then they went back and stayed at Mama and Papa Davies' house. Then they went to Duchesne and then to Mountain Home. And then when they lived in Mountain Home, they lived in a one-room log house in the middle of town with one window on the north, one window on the west, and a bed. And I have the bed now, old iron bed that Grandma Stevenson gave her. And then Grandma Esther Cecilia Hamblin Davies died the 29th of November 1936. And Grandpa took his family out to Springville. Well, he had taken them out to Springville before she died, and that was where they were living, in Springville, when she got infection in her thumb because of either a sliver or a black widow. They didn't ever know. And when she died, he was herding sheep, and they had to go find him. That's kind of sad. In 1936, we moved back to Talmadge, and that was when they went out to Springville. That's what it was. And when I was a year and a half old, we were living in Mountain Home in a small house close to Uncle Hap and Aunt Violet's. And that's where Billy was born, in September of 1936. And they named him James William Stevenson. And it was just a little ways from Grandma Stevenson's house. And that was in 1937. When I was 2 years old and we moved back to Talmadge, I can remember trying to change Billy's diaper while Mom and Dad were out milking the cows. I didn't do a very good job because I remember got all over the floor. Even though we were living in Grandpa Davies' house, we didn't see him very often because in the summer he would be out sheep herding. And Dad would order baby chicks and raise them, and he would put them by the stove in the kitchen to keep them warm until they're big enough to go outside. In 1938, when I was 3 years old and we lived in Grandpa Davies' house, still, I remember I wouldn't let Billy have any of my birthday cake, and I can still remember it sitting in the old icebox, the wooden icebox cabinet, and Billy has that cabinet. No, Mac has that cabinet now. He has it, and Bert helped him refinish it and refurbish it, and it looks good. Billy and I played in the sagebrush a lot. And one time I sat on an anthill. A mom heard me screaming and came and got me. And there were ants all over in my pants and all over me, biting me. And they were big red ants. Billy and I were in the chicken coop one time, and I talked Billy into drinking some stuff that was in a little brown bottle. And he said that was nasty, so then I didn't have any. And then he got really sick. And so I went and got Dad, and he went and took him in the house, and Uncle Delbert made strong black coffee, made him drink it, and Grandma made him drink dishwater soap until he threw up and threw up. And then he was okay, but I felt so bad. We were living in Grandpa Davy's house in 1939 when my mom had twins. On June the 19th, 1939, one of them had died earlier, and so it was decomposed, and it probably killed the other one. The other one lived only a short time, and they named her Twyla, and she's buried in Mountain Home next to our baby sister, who was stillborn before I was born. And when that happened, they were living with Grandma Stevenson, and when she started having pains, they took her over to Grandma Davy's name was Esther Cecilia Hamblin Davies, and then they lived there after that. And I remember Billy and I played in the yard with the chickens. The chickens were all around in the front yard. And Billy and I played with them, and I don't know why we did this, but we caught a chicken and stuffed dirt down its throat until it died. And I felt really bad. I don't know why we did it. And not long after that, in the fall, we moved to Redding, California, and we lived with our grandma. Then it was Grandma Charlotte Rebecca Winder Stevenson Bunce, because she had married Ben Bunce. And then we lived in a little trailer in Redding, and it rained all winter, and that's where we were at Christmas time. And all I got was a little rubber doll that had been used, but that was okay. When I was 7 years old, no, wait a minute, we're back in 1940. We were in California still. After we left Redding, we lived with Aunt Stella, that's my dad's sister, for a while, and then we lived with Aunt Larita, that's his other sister. And I went to kindergarten for 1 week, and I remember my cousin Darryl used to boss me and Billy around. And I remember playing on the beach. And when we were at Aunt Stella's place, I remember Dad's old car. It was an old Model T Ford or something that looked like it. And he had built, where the rumble seat went, he had built a little chicken coop so that we could take his chickens with us when we went to California. And when we were in Long Beach, we moved to Long Beach after that. Mom got sick and had to go to the hospital, and Becky was born. And she was premature, and so they had to leave her there until she was 5 pounds, and that was about a month. And when she was there, she had, Mom had to use a breast pump, and I remember seeing it sitting in the cabinet. She used a breast pump, and then she'd have to take it over to the hospital so they could feed her. And there was a park across from where we lived in an apartment, and Billy and I would go over there and play. And I went down the slippery slide, and I got a big long piece of wire stuck in my foot. And so he went and got our dad, and he came over and pulled it out. And Billy said blood was running all over, and he carried me back home. And when we left there, we went over to my Aunt Stella's house, and I remember that chicken coop in the back of the car, and the car had flat tires, and that must have been really, really hard for my dad to have to realize that he went to California to probably make his fortune with his family and his chickens, and he had to leave them because California told us they give us a ticket, put us on a train to go home, and don't ever come back. That wasn't very nice, but I remember Mom and Dad sitting at the railroad station trying to decide whether they should leave or whether they didn't, and I didn't quite understand all of what was going on. When we moved back to Talmadge, we lived in Grandpa's house for a little while, and I started school, and then we bought the Bohannon house, and I was in first grade. And my teacher's name was Adeline Anderson, and we were in a one room. There was 2 rooms in the school and a kitchen in the middle, and the one room had first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth in rows. And I remember one day, my dad sitting close to the radio listening to it, and he turned it up, and they were saying, the Japs just bombed Pearl Harbor, and that was the beginning of the Second World War. And after that, in the fall, we moved to Salt Lake. We moved there before school started. And because I started second grade when we lived in Salt Lake, we lived in an apartment just west of the City County building. And then we moved to Concord Avenue while I was still in the second grade. When we lived on Concord Avenue, I remember Billy and I had friends down the street. Their names were Kathleen and Joni Howe. And while we were living there, I remember President George Albert Smith came to our house once. He lived in our ward or our stake, I don't know which it was. And the church was right across the street from our house. The railroad track was south of our house, and the garden was between the railroad track and our house. And that was where Mac was born. And he was born November 23rd, 1942, and they named him David Mac Stevenson. And Dad wanted to name him Itel Mac after his boss, but they forgot. So it's David Mac. On December the 5th, 1943, I was baptized in the old tabernacle basement, and I can remember the marble oxen around the baptismal font on the temple square. That was really neat. We moved back to Talmadge, and my teacher said that I'll go back. I had the measles really, really bad, and it made my eyes bad. And so when I was in the third grade in Salt Lake Concord Avenue, I couldn't see the blackboard, and so I didn't know what to do, and I was too bashful to say anything. So I just sat there, and they held me back. So I started third grade again, a second time, when we lived in Salt Lake. And then we moved back to Talmadge, and my teacher said I shouldn't have been held back, but she had to stick with what they said. And then we moved to Hanford, Washington, and we lived in a one-room tent house across the road from a roller skating rink, and I went over there every day, and that was so fun. I loved to skate. And Billy and I would go to a talent show once a week, and it was in a big tent, and the thing we liked the best, there was a red-headed clown, and I can't remember his name. I used to know it. And he would eat goldfish out of the bowl. That was so amazing. Then we found out later, he took us for ice cream cones, and we found out later that goldfish were carrot slices. And we moved back to Talmadge and lived again in our house where Mom was doing laundry at Grandpa's house. And I was at school or else up at our house, I don't know which. And she was doing some sewing in the kitchen. And in the back room where the washer was, Becky got up on a chair and got up by the washer. And it was the kind that has a wringer. It goes around and around. You would put the clothes in and wring the clothes out. She got her arm in the wringer, and it pulled the flesh right off the bone of her arm. And so they took her to Roosevelt, to the hospital, and then to Salt Lake. And then we moved to Clearfield on the south side of the town. And then we moved to Smith Village. And while we were there, Becky's arm got gangrene in it. And the doctor put maggots in the gangrene to eat out the dead flesh. Bless her little heart, huh? That wouldn't have been fun at all. I was in the third grade there, and then when I went into the fourth grade in the fall, I sat across from a girl who told me her name was Alice Hamblin. And I remembered the name Hamblin because I knew my great-grandfather really well, who was Lyman Dwayne Hamblin. And I remember when we would go to the conference and sit around on the temple grounds, and he would sit with us and listen to conference. My dad started buying wrecked taxi cabs and fixing them up and then painting them because he learned how to use a spray paint gun while he worked at Hillfield. Eileen and cousin Vicky lived with us and worked at Hillfield during the summer too. The war ended in the middle of the summer in 1945, and we moved back to Talmadge, and I was in the fourth grade. And Dad continued fixing up taxis and also started fixing our house, and I started the fifth grade. And he did it gradually, but it must have been very hard because he put cement floor on the whole floor where it used to be big boards right on top of the dirt. And the roof was dirt, and the roof slanted a little bit, and it was dirt and clay, and weeds would grow on the dirt. And Dad took the dirt off and put a new roof on that was a gable, and it had roofing material on it. The house, which actually was a cabin, had 3 rooms, and while Mom was putting petitions in the 2 back rooms while Dad was working on taxi cabs. So then there was a room between the kitchen, and then there was a bedroom, and then there was a petition between in the other room. So Mom and Dad had a bedroom, and Becky and I had a bedroom. So then it was a 3-bedroom house instead of 1. And Mom and Dad worked very hard on making a better life for us. Mom sent for a green ice cream maker from Montgomery Ward catalog, and it tasted so good. The ice cream did. And she also made a little sofa for us because we didn't have a couch or a sofa, and she made a little sofa for us that had flowers on the material. She covered the seat out of a car seat and made covers for it and had a ruffle around it, and it was so cute. And she was really, really good at sewing things. And everything she sewed was on our old treadle sewing machine. And in 1946, I ended the 5th grade. And then we moved to Wellington out by Price, and we lived by a wash. And that's like a deep canyon, like the Grand Canyon, but it wasn't that big. And then I went to stay in town with my great-grandma, Ellen Pilling Winder Snow. And then later, the rest of our family moved into town, close to school. They lived on one side of the school, and Grandma lived on the other. And then I went and stayed with them. My best friend was Joy Golding, and we were in the 6th grade. And my first date was with a boy named Horace Thane, and we went to a dance, and all we did was sit and watch everybody else dance. And Billy had a friend named George Branch, and he brought a huge bag of spud nuts over to us that were day-old spud nuts. And spud nuts were made with potato flour, and they were so good. Becky got really sick and had to have her tonsils out. We moved back to Talmadge for a short time, and then we moved back to Wellington, lived on a farm in the northwest part of town. And I remember that lightning hit a barrel that was just a little ways from the house by the barn. Then we moved back to Talmadge, and I was 12 years old on the 24th of April, and they had 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade in the East room, and 4th, 5th, and 6th in the West room. And I remember Grandpa Davies was the cook for a while, and that was really neat. And then we were there when 6th grade ended. And I think that was the best year in Talmadge for me. I started to learn to play the piano, and it was an old upright that was what Grandma and Grandpa Davies bought for my mom, because when she was little she played the piano so good. She learned how to play on a cardboard box. I loved to hear her play Under the Double Eagle and Falling Waters, and I spent hours playing the piano and sewing on our old treadle sewing machine. I made things for 4-H. On August the 24th, I graduated from primary in Talmadge. I started the 7th grade at Altamont High School, and I played in the band, and we were so good, our band was asked to march in the 1947 centennial days of the 47 parade in Salt Lake City. And I learned to play the drums really good. While we were there in Altamont, I was in an operetta. It's a play with singing, speaking, both parts in it. And I was a big success at my part, but I didn't know it until afterwards when everybody told me. That was fun. My mom had a surprise party for me, and I was 13 and in the 8th grade. We rode a school bus to Altamont, and I met Wendell Evans, and I thought I fell in love. That was the end of the 8th grade. I did sewing. That was at the beginning of 8th grade, excuse me. I did sewing in 4-H and made a dress for Becky, and it got 1st place in the Duchesne Fair, and then went to the State Fair, and it got a 2nd place ribbon. All the other girls, Irma Sorensen, Peggy Sorensen, Vega Burton, and Marlene Blazard, were so mad they wouldn't talk to me because I got those ribbons, and they didn't on their things. And I only went to Altamont High School for a short time when I was in the 8th grade, and then we moved out to Salt Lake, and we lived in Aunt Charlotte's place for a while. And I remember Uncle Delbert moved us with his great big truck. And then we moved to an apartment on the Avenues, and I went to Horace Mann Junior High, and I loved to go to choir class. In November, or just after Halloween, we moved to Phoenix. The first house was nice, and we had no Christmas, and someone from our branch, because we didn't have a ward, it was an LDS branch, brought us a tree, a little Christmas tree, and a present for each of us. And I remember mine and Becky's were new underpants. That was pretty nice. I liked Phoenix a lot. The second house was just over one street from the first house, and the third house was across the street from it, and it was a rock house. And we all 4 of us kids went to Roosevelt School, because they had elementary and the junior high in one school. And we went on trucks and picked cotton, because my dad couldn't find any work, so we would all go on the truck and pick cotton. And I had a boyfriend, his name was Jimmy Fisher. And then when the 8th grade ended, it was so hot. My friend and I, Blondie, we were walking back from the store, and it was in May, and it was so hot that we started laughing and laughing and laid down in the street and just laughed and got silly because the heat got to us. I remember the Okies and the Arkies lived down the street from us, and they were so gross they spat tobacco. That's what they said. Then we moved back to Utah and stayed with Aunt Charlotte Gentry in Salt Lake City. They had a one-room shack in the backyard, and we lived in it. Then we moved to Clearfield. I moved in with Aunt Irma and helped her. I tended the kids and helped her while she worked. And Mom and Dad and the others lived in a little house down by the canal, which is close to where the freeway is now. And I started 9th grade at North Davis Junior High. I played the drums in the band there too, and I had a boyfriend named Jimmy Walker. Then I met Bert Hamblin at a mutual party, and I fell in love with him, and I felt bad for Jimmy Walker. In the summer, we moved to Layton on Main Street, and we lived above a bar. And I started a job at the tomato factory, and then in September I started 10th grade at Davis High School. And at Davis High School I played the drums in the band, and it was neat. I was picked to play the drums in the field at halftime during the games, and at the basketball games at the halftime. And I thought I was really big stuff. We moved to a basement apartment on the north side of Clearfield, and I met Noel Ellis, and I thought I fell in love again. He danced so good and was so polite to me. And Irma got a divorce and moved to California, and that was close to Thanksgiving. And then we moved to California, and we stayed with her, and I started school in San Bernardino, and only stayed there one day. And then they pulled me out, and we moved to Poway, California. And we thought we were going to be living in frontier housing that was close to the schools in Point Loma, and so we started school in town. And then they found out they couldn't get housing that soon, so they pulled us out, and we went to school in Escondido, which was just a little ways from Poway, and we had to ride a bus. And then we got housing at Frontier Housing, and we all changed schools again and went back to Point Loma to the end of the school year. And Becky reminded me that we all went to 5 different schools that year. And we did. I added them up. That included Point Loma twice. I met Bob Baxter at a dance, and that is when I learned to do the jitterbug, similar to the Charleston, and that was so fun. And it was really fun going to the church dances, and our branch would meet wherever they could. That's like a ward, but it was a branch. And they would meet in other denominations, churches, or for a while they met over a bar. And I remember I would catch a bus to go to church. And our ward, or our branch, all felt like family. In San Diego, where we went, there were sailors. Every place you went, there were sailors walking all up and down the streets. And Jimmy Walker, a boyfriend I had in the 9th grade, joined the Navy, and I saw him there. He came over, and I permed his hair, and I burned it. I told him what to do with peroxide, and he put it on, and then it burned. And that was the end of 10th grade. And Mom and Dad and the other kids went back to Utah. I stayed for another week to finish school and then to go to a party that some girls had invited me to. And then I closed the apartment up and went on a bus back to Salt Lake. And it was so hot. It was terribly hot. And I remember in San Diego, it was always in the 70s. And when I got off the bus in Salt Lake, I got a cab to go to the address Mom had given me. And it was a terrible house in a terrible neighborhood. They were only there a short time. And then we moved to a house on Gordon Avenue in Layton. And at that time, there was fields on both sides of our house. And now, the fields that were on the west side of our house, that's where the Layton Hills Mall is. And I got a job at Hillfield in the summer, and they paid me to go to school. At college, I went to Weber State and had 3 classes, and they were blueprint reading, mechanics shop, and math, which I didn't do so good in math. I started the 11th grade at Davis High School, and I remember that house that we lived in Layton was a nice big farmhouse with a real fridge in it instead of an icebox. And the icebox that we had always used is what Billy has now. Mac has now at his house. And Dad, Bert helped him fix it up. I sewed all my own school clothes, and Marion Cook was one of my best friends in school. I dated Bert and then Noel, and then Bert, and then all back and forth, and I was dating both of them when all of a sudden Bert showed up one night just before New Year's with a diamond ring. And when I went back to school and Noel saw it, he wouldn't speak to me anymore. And I felt bad for him. I was the artist for the school newspaper, and I really liked school that year. I made friends with some girls from Bountiful, and that was fun. In the fall, I was in the backyard gathering some really pretty colored leaves, and Max and Billy's rooster attacked me and spurred me. And I'd been afraid of roosters ever since. But I do remember that in Talmadge, my dad's rooster jumped up on my head and scared me, and my dad thought it was funny. I started doing a lot of drawing when we lived in Layton, and planned to get an art degree in college, and then I wanted to be a fashion designer. Mom and Dad on the Christmas of 1952 had other ideas. They got me a typewriter for Christmas, a real nice Underwood typewriter, because they had big plans for me to be a secretary. Only I wanted to be a fashion designer. And when I showed them the diamond ring, they were not too happy, because they wanted me to finish school and had all those plans for me. Bert and I made an apartment in Bert's parents' basement, and on June the 12th, Bert and I were married in the Salt Lake LDS Temple. My mom, Grandma and Grandpa Stevenson went with us to the temple, and that was neat, and because I remember that they were riding with us on the way home. My bridesmaids at our reception were all dressed in lavender, and my bouquet was lavender. Faye and Sheraton took pictures for us, but then they lost the film, so we don't have any pictures of our wedding reception. We went on our honeymoon to Rock Creek, and Grandpa Davies had built a new lodge. He had just finished building it, and we did take pictures there and on the bridge going across the river, so we do have pictures of that. We rode horses and we fished, and Bert had never been there before, so he fell in love with Rock Creek, and after that we went a lot to Rock Creek, and we took Bert's parents out too, and they liked it too. On Saturday before Christmas, a drunk driver hit Mom and Becky head on, and this was in 1953, and they had to take Becky to the hospital and do a lot of surgery. And we went to the hospital, and I saw Becky sitting there, laying there. It looked like she had two mouths because her chin was split right open. And I started crying, and I couldn't hardly walk. I had to leave, and I almost passed out. And Mom and Dad moved to Wherry housing on base, on Hillfield base. And we were going to see them one night, and Emery was driving. And Bertha was in the front, and I was sitting right behind Emery, and Bert was sitting next to me. And when we went to turn to go up to Wherry housing, we turned left, and a teenage driver decided to pass us at the same time we turned left, and he passed us on the left and smashed into us and hit right where I was sitting. And when we got to Mom and Dad's, the police had called Dr. Nesbitt, and he came over, rushing over, and he checked me out and said I was okay. Brent was born 7th of February at the old D Hospital on 24th and Harrison. He was so precious, and I loved him instantly. We named him Brent John Hamblin, and the John was after Bert John and Emery John and Frederick John. Bert made a crib for him that also had drawers in the bottom. Our apartment was about 12 by 14 feet, so everything was small and compact. When Brent was about 7 months old, we moved to Magna, close to Eileen and Wade, and Bert was helping to build Kern's housing project. Our house in Magna was 2 rooms, and I thought it was wonderful. We slept on a twin-size bed, and we went out to Talmadge and got the old sewing machine that Mom told me I could have, and I made all of Brent's clothes, and that was a lot of fun. Mom was working at a sewing place, and she would get me material, and so I made all of Brent's clothes. Then we moved to Ogden on 23rd Street in Grand Avenue at Sunray Apartments, and it was 1 big room, and Mom and Dad were in Washington Terrace, and then they got a divorce. So Dad bought a little house on Jefferson, and he went on TDY for Hillfield, and we moved into his house while he was gone, and then he decided to sell it to us for what he bought it for, and it was $3,500. Brent was 1 year old and such a good little boy. Sometimes I thought Bert disciplined him too hard. And I remember I cried one time when Bert spanked him. I never got spanked that I can remember, and that was kind of hard for me to accept. But I think probably later on I got frustrated when there was too much stuff coming at me, and I probably spanked the kids and should not have, and I feel bad that I did. When we lived there and Brent was about 2 years old, we had a little brown puppy, and it barked too much, so Bert took it away. And Brent was so sad when he went outside and he couldn't find it anymore. Brent didn't talk much, and Dr. Rich said that he will talk when he has something to say. So when he was about 3 years old, I had a little ceramic frog in a planter, and it had dirt around it, and Brent picked it up and took it in the bathroom and set it on the toilet seat and said, "Naughty, naughty." I guess he decided he had something to say. I got pregnant and with Dwayne, and I had high blood pressure, and this was in 1956. And I had high blood pressure and albumin of the kidneys, so Dr. Nesbitt gave me something to start me having labor pains, so he was born early, and he was born the 16th of April. And I remember that was very hot. It was a very hot spring and a very hot summer. And we named him Lyman Dwayne Hamblin after my great-grandfather. Brett was so sweet and loving to his little brother, and Dwayne was a good baby. He had lots of blonde hair that stood up about 2 inches, and I would wet it down and comb it down, and it would stand right up again, and I just loved him. Bert had just finished a fence from the house to the side yard, and he left the keys in the car and left Brent in there to play, and the next thing I knew, Brent and the car went crashing through the fence. Bert's mother gave us the old china cabinet that was her mother's, and it was in bad shape, but I liked it anyway, and we used that for our china. For Christmas we got a Wonder Horse for Brent and Dwayne, and they really liked it. And in 1957 we worked on our little house and the yard, and they looked really nice. And Bert put pink siding on, and we painted the trim white, and we had a little rocking chair and a chair, and I painted them pink to match, and it looked so cute. And that was where Bert would put wagons, the neighborhood kids' wagons, behind a tractor and pull them around like a train. Bert worked at the cannery on 2nd Street, canning apricots in June and July. And then later, I don't know if it was that year or not, the cannery burnt down. And Bert could see smoke, so he walked and walked and walked till he found out where the smoke was, and he ended up at 2nd Street, and it was the cannery. So then he came back and got us. And then we went back and watched it finish burning down. Terry was born in September, and he was so chubby and cuddly, and I sure loved him. We named him Terry Stephen Hamblin, and Stephen was after my dad, because everyone at work called my dad Steve. Everybody thought our house looked really good, and that was when the neighbor also took a picture of our house, and it showed there was morning glories climbing up the side of the house, and a white picket fence, and the pink fence, and pink rocking chair and chair sitting out the side. So that was neat. We had 2 little parakeets, a green one and a blue one, and this is in 1958. And I would let them out of the cage, and one day I let them out of their cage, which was common, and Terry would crawl around chasing them, and it was so cute. and they were so tame that they would let him. And I couldn't find him when it was time for him to go back in the cage that night, and I looked all over the house for him. I couldn't find him. And then when I found him, they had crawled under the water heater and they were dead. And I cried and cried, and I felt like I didn't deserve to have anything. The boys missed them because they were so very, very tame and friendly. One time I made homemade root beer, and my mom came over to visit, and we opened a couple of bottles, and we drank root beer and laughed and got silly and sillier and sillier, and then we found out the root beer had fermented, and she didn't dare drive home. We bought the lot next door to us, on the north of us, from Mr. Leth, and paid him $50 a month until we had it paid off, which was $1,500. Then we started making plans to build a house. And we sold our house, our little house, and moved up into an apartment on 21st Street. And when we were up there, I took pictures of Brent, Dwayne, and Terry in a big wash tub. And it looked like rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub. And the picture is in everybody's family album, or their album that I made for them 3 years ago. And I kept their hair cut real short. I cut it real short until they got older and wouldn't let me cut it anymore. Our house was so wonderful. When we moved into it, I thought I was in heaven. Our new house was built by Bert and his dad, Emery Hamblin. In September, before I moved into the house, Brent started school, and he was a good student. He went to kindergarten at Mount Fort, and at that time Mount Fort was at 12th and Washington on that whole block, and it was the elementary and the junior high. And when we were living there, Bert went to R.C. Willey and bought new furniture for our new house. And he bought a bedroom set, which is the black one we still have, and an unfinished desk. And we still have the desk downstairs, and it is the computer desk. And in 1960, in January, I was pregnant, and I waxed the kitchen floor. This is in the new house. And I did the splits because it was slick, and fell, and my water broke. We didn't know how far along I was, and 2 weeks later, we had a baby born, was born stillborn at the hospital. And then we found out later, quite a bit later, that I was further along than we thought, and it was actually 6.5 months. And when I came home from the hospital, I sat in the middle of the floor in the room where it was going to be his room, and I cried and cried. And nobody cared, I felt like. And Mom came over and consoled me. I was so proud of Brent. He was in first grade, and he would get up and get himself ready for school all by himself. And he was always a good student. And he was always good to his little brothers. In January of 1961, Tanya was born on the 23rd of January. We named her Tanya Darlene after me, and she was our little princess, and I loved her so much. It was so fun making clothes for her, and I'd sit her up on the counter in the bathroom on the vanity and do her hair and dress her. And the same Sunday that she was blessed, they put me into the Relief Society presidency, and Lola Marie had made arrangements ahead of time, and their voice sang, "Look what came to Bert's house." And that was a surprise to us. And when Tanya was 9 months old, I think. Well, anyway, just before Christmas, Eileen tended Tanya, and we took Brent, Dwayne, and Terry, and we went to California to see Alice and Ivan. And when we come back, we went by Monticello and saw Bill and Janelle, and we let the kids out, and they went up to the door and said, "We haven't got any place to stay, can we stay here?" And then they found out it was us and our kids. And then at Christmas time, we bought a puppy. We got a little puppy, and it was half Pekingese and half Pomeranian. And she was so little, I could put her in my pocket to take her home, and we named her Nikki. And in that same book that I made pictures for everybody, that album, there is a picture of Brent holding Nikki, and then there's Dwayne and Terry and Tanya, and also in the picture. So I hope sometimes you guys look at those pictures. In 1962, Tina was born on the 20th of December, and after going over for 3 weeks, I was finally in labor for 3 days. And Tina was such a happy baby, so we named her Tina Gay, and I loved her so much. She had lots of dark hair and cute chubby cheeks. When she was about 5 or 6 months old, we went with Bertha and Emery to Denver by way of Vernal and the Dinosaur Museum, and we took her, and Eileen tended Tanya and the boys. And we have a picture of her someplace with her sitting on the hood of our car when we were there. And when we got home, we started plans to building a swimming pool in the backyard, and where there was a vineyard and a cherry tree, and the boys used to have a tree hut in the cherry tree. That's where we built the pool. And the pool was 16 by 32, and it had a diving board and a light at the deep end. And it was so fun to be in that pool and only have our family there instead of a whole bunch of other screaming people you didn't know who they were. And we built a cedar grape stake fence around it. And we had a lot of fun. And so did the company we had. We had a lot of company come and use it, and after a while I started charging them 25 cents each time they come swimming to help pay for the chlorine. And we worked on our yard, and it really looked good. We had a little fish pond by the back patio. Our house had the living room in the back, and there was a little fish pond. In the fall, Bert went to work for Purser Larson and had to go to Elko to work. When he came home, one time Tina said, "Where's my other daddy?" And it was because Bert grew a beard. Bert built a table for us with 8 sides that I had designed, and we still have it. Right now it's at the cabin, but I'm going to bring it back sometime. Bert was working at Elko when Uncle Wade died. And then when he was done at Elko, then they sent him to Idaho, to Soda Springs, to build 4plexes. When school was out in May, we moved to Soda Springs. I had a Pontiac Tempest, and I loved it. The engine went out, and we bought a Pontiac Catalina. And we lived in one of the 4plexes that Bert built. I bought the metal dining room chairs that we still have, and they were new. They had bright orange flowers on the seats. One morning during the first winter, we were there. I went to get milk at the store for breakfast before the kids went to school, and it was 40 degrees below zero, and I didn't know it because there was no frost on the window. We didn't have frost because it was such dry weather. Bert's cousin, Dwayne Hamblin, lived in Soda Springs, and Brent became good friends with their twin sons, Brett and Barry, and Tanya was best friends with their daughter. And while we were still living in the apartment, we bought a skidoo snowmobile. And one night we went snowmobiling with some friends, and Bert and I were on ours, and it was quite fun. We were having a lot of fun. We were following the others, and all of a sudden the others turned, and we didn't, and we went over someplace and landed down a lot lower. And I didn't know it, but I was pregnant with Tammy. We went to Hooper Springs quite often. That was a place that had carbonated water naturally come out of the ground. And it seemed like there was going to be plenty of work in the area, so we made plans to build a house. And the lot we bought was on the south edge of town, and the Bear River was down south of it. So we found out we had bought a lot where the Pioneer Trail to Oregon was. We built our new house on River Drive, that's where it was, in Soda Springs, and Terry shingled the roof, and he was only 9 years old. It was a beautiful house with a sunken living room and a lava rock fireplace that was the whole width of the room. It had 4 bedrooms, and Tamara was born there when we lived there, 29th of May, at the Caribou County hospital.